treason, sedition, rebellion. This is the heritage of the American patriot. Those revolutionaries who stood on principle to fight against tyranny no matter the cost. And that spirit lives strong today in the activists and freedom fighters who fight against the authoritarian state. Each in their own way, each with their own mission, united for the cause of
had the
freedom.
idea to run on a platform of fuck the police prior to actually winning the primary.
AOC is a drama queen and she's full of shit.
They said, you don't get to tell us no, we're the state health department, and I said, hell no.
You brought a freaking guillotine.
People already pushing back in ways that didn't even need any votes to be cast.
I'm not ratting on anybody, and I did what I did, so you're going to have to give me what the law says you have to give me.
You want to make the world a better place? Have some babies and raise them to not be stupid.
Hope I don't get canceled talking to you.
These are the people whose stories I'm here to share. I'm Justin O'Donnell, and this is Subversive.
Man, governments are not going to like this shit.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, activists, anarchists, shitposters, and people of the internet, thank you for tuning in to Subversive 73. As always, I'm your host, Justin O'Donnell, and before we get started, just remember, whatever platform you listen on, whether it's YouTube, Odyssey, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, or on the radio with LRN.FM, you can help grow the show by liking, commenting, subscribing, and most of all, sharing our content with your friends. And if you enjoyed this content, you can join our production team by visiting patreon.com/O'Donnell. Link is in the description of the video or podcast you're listening to. Again, that's patreon.com/O'Donnell. And make sure to check out our sponsor, SnexSwag.com, for all your favorite Subversive official merch, including some brand new designs on t-shirts, hoodies, dresses, coffee mugs. There's even some skirts in there. I don't know. I only designed half of it, but it's great product, great swag, and SnexSwag.com, where you can get all your favorite Liberty merch to literally wear your messaging on your sleeves. Now, if you want to keep in touch between shows, you can follow me on social media, join our community Discord channel, where you can chat with other fans of the show at any time, and all these links can be found in the description of the video or podcast you're listening to. So make sure you check them out today. Now, today we got a story, because all good activism starts with the story, or at least has a story to be told. But quite a few years ago, all the way back in August of 2017, there was a free speech rally scheduled to be held on the Boston Common in Boston, Massachusetts. It was actually a pretty common occurrence at the time. It was a group of people who had small rallies, about 30 to 40 people every few months, to hear from a few controversial local politicians from varying political, social, economic backgrounds in the city of Boston on whatever topics of the day were relevant and prevalent and subject to discourse. What made this one different that August, though, was it scheduled 2 weeks after the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally. Well, the one that devolved into violence, chaos, and led to the death of protesters and scores of arrests and charges of terrorism and accusations of white supremacy infesting the libertarian liberty movement in this country. The mayor of Boston, in a fit of rage and a fit of outcry, decried the fact that these same right-wing Nazis would be holding an event in his city the next weekend. And in outrage, nearly 40,000 people from all over New England descended onto the Boston Commons that Saturday morning with the singular intent of stopping the supposed gathering of white supremacists in their city. This scene was something astounding to behold, and I made down the drive myself out of impulse to document the occasion and witness what I was sure was to be chaos in the outcome. The truth is, the Nazis on the rotunda in their speaking engagement consisted of about 20 people listening to an Indian man who was running for Senate, Shiva Ayadari, Vermin Supreme, a representative of Black Lives Matter Boston, and a communist union organizer from the Teamsters, talking about the various political issues of the day. But they were separated from the 40,000 people protesting them by every police officer in the city of Boston, keeping them too far away to hear what was being said and to see who was saying it. So 40,000 people, just out of earshot and just out of sight, couldn't witness what they were opposing. And they spent the entire day chanting, jeering, threatening, insulting, and instigating violence against people that they probably agreed with more than they disagreed with. And at the end of the day, at the afternoon, the Boston police made the decision that they would escort the remaining rallygoers off the plaza in protective custody due to the many instances of politically motivated violence that had been taking place on the Common that afternoon. I myself had been assaulted 4 times because it was assumed that as a white man with a beard and recently shaved his head that morning, I must be racist. I must be a Nazi. I, in fact, kept a live tweet tally going throughout the entire day of the number of times I was called a racist, not because of anything I said or did, but because of how I looked. And I just found that hilarious. But when they began to evacuate the rally goers in protective custody and put them into paddy wagons and armored vehicles to escort them safely out, 40,000 protesters joined in unison in a celebratory cheer of victory, chanting over and over and over, "This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like." And that's tonight's topic. Tonight's topic is democracy. What Winston Churchill called the worst system of government, except for all the others. And what Hans Hermann Hoppe elegantly termed as the God that failed. A God whose evident failures include rising unemployment, expanding public debt, insolvent welfare systems, uncontrolled inflation, and no legitimate political solutions to the social problems that people are faced with. Now, what Hoppe failed to consider as an evident failure of democracy might be its practice in its truest form: the rule of the mob, the oppression of the few for the comfort of the many. And I remember standing there on the Boston Common that day and hearing the chants echoing throughout the city and thinking to myself, yes, this is what democracy looks like. The death of liberty, the suppression of the individual, where any incongruent thought is crushed, displaced, ignored, and suppressed. The tyranny of the majority would celebrate the death of individual freedom. And I thought briefly of Natalie Portman's character Padme in Star Wars when the Chancellor was granted supreme executive powers by the Senate. So this is how liberty dies, to thunderous applause. Well, tonight's guest discovered another failing of democracy, and that's the fact that the will of the people is often ignored by the systems designed to rule and oppress them in the first place. Kaitlyn Crosby is a libertarian, and she decided she was going to run for office, like many of us do at one point or another. But unlike most of us, she won. She took on a task, overcame insurmountable odds, and convinced the people of Austin, Pennsylvania to elect her to be their next mayor. And that was a step too far for those whose legitimacy is threatened by the notion of a candidate supporting individual liberty and freedom apart from the systems that they enforce. But before she could ever even take office and be sworn in, an unelected bureaucracy went to work to disqualify her from office, remove her from her position that she was elected to serve, and denied the people of Austin, Pennsylvania, the right to their democratic vote, seeing its fulfillment. Kate, thanks for joining the show tonight. How are you? And this is a recent turn of events. You actually just got the news that your case was finally lost just last week?
Yeah. So we went to court 12, and it was like, I guess it'll be about a week. My decision, and then I think it was last Monday, which was coincidentally the day before the next borough council meeting. So, I didn't get to actually participate. I had to sit, with the public at the last borough council meeting, which is really, and the person who, our borough council president was the one who pretty much told the DA, yeah, we want to remove her. And he, as the president, spoke for the rest of council without actually speaking to the rest of borough council. So I recorded last week's meeting. Everyone at council was like, we're so confused because why is the DA saying that they're taking direction, from the borough council when none of us have spoken to him? And the only person that stayed quiet was the borough council president, now the interim mayor.
That is wild. And it's a wild tale of how you got to there, because it's not something that just happened overnight. And one of the things I do like to ask everybody, because I do have a lot of candidates come on, we talk a lot about a lot of different races throughout the country and the political philosophies and solutions that people are trying to bring to promote liberty in their lifetime. But most importantly, I think to fully understand your story, we have to understand how you even got to this point. What brought you to the Libertarian Party? What brought you to the Liberty Movement? And what possessed you to run for mayor?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things. So, back in 2014 was when everything happened. The reason why I was removed from office. And also my husband was in the Marine Corps, and he had just gotten out, just started school, and he ended up committing suicide 2 weeks before Christmas. So that that was where I started really getting into like the whole anti-war movement and like really going in and researching about things like that. And I found like Adam Kokesh, you know, and Iraq Veterans Against the War and like all of that stuff. And so it kind of like led me down that rabbit hole. But like I said, like right at that same time, you know, I was in a car accident. Somebody, you know, was injured and someone was killed. So I went to jail for almost 2 years. Like I think it was 3 months after my husband, it was the night of my husband's funeral that the accident happened. And then 3 months later was when they finally like, you know, picked me up and stuff. And I went to jail for 19 and a half months. And that was just sitting in county awaiting trial or any kind of just the court system in general, you know? So like I watched the government fail my husband. I watched the slow wheels of justice, like, because from the get, you know, I admitted my guilt. I was like, whatever, just give me a plea, I'll sign whatever. Like, I just, you know what I mean? It wasn't a victimless crime. So, you know what I mean? Like, I still felt like, okay, I still need to go and like, you know, serve my time for this and whatever they want. Okay. And it still ended up taking 7 years for me to actually get sentenced from 20.
So much for a right to a speedy trial.
Well, a lot of times, like they'll have you waive that because they're like, like it's like the rule 600 or something, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, do you want to waive this rule 600?" And people's lawyers will just be like, "Yeah," and you have no clue what it is, and then you find out, "Oh, I just waived my right to a speedy trial," you know, like after the fact. So, yeah, I never thought that it would take that long, or that like I didn't know how the system truly worked, like until you're actually like in it, you know?
Yeah, no, I'm no stranger to the criminal justice system. I've made no attempt to hide my past from people who've gotten to know me. I wasn't always a libertarian. I didn't always have the strongest respect for property rights when I was younger, and before I joined the Army, and even early on in my career in the Army, I did some things that were very much in violation of criminal code and property rights, and had my fair share of involvement in the courts in Massachusetts and jail time. I had never experienced anything but a speedy trial. And it wasn't until I had talked to a friend who was undergoing a federal indictment that took 6 years before he even got questioned for the first time after he was served his indictment that I had heard of something taking that long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I watched people come in and out, obviously, because I was in county jail. Like, I watched people come in and out and go to state prison and just keep coming back to county jail. Like, I would have people come in like 3 or 4 times, you know, on separate charges. And they'd be like, well, what'd you do again? I'm like, no, I'm still here. Like, you know, I'm still waiting for court. I don't know what's going to happen. And like after that 19 and a half months was when I finally went to court and I got like a bail reduction. And then I did end up getting bailed out. So then, you know, it was another 5 years until it was July of 2021 when I finally signed my plea. And I was already running. I had like disclosed all of this with everyone in my circle and in the LP, you know. I'm like, I'm probably the worst candidate, you know, like because I have all this on my, you know, like I just, you know, muddy waters, whatever, like, but then I don't know, I just was so motivated. I was on the Jorgensen campaign. You know, I did 2 events here in Pennsylvania for her bus tour, like her bus tour thing or whatever. And I got so used to talking to people, and I was talking to people in my town, and a lot of people were like, well, you should run for office, you know? And I was like, hey, okay, like maybe I will, you know? And then I decided to, because I didn't know I didn't know about any of these rules or stipulations or, you know, saying that I couldn't run, because everything I had like Googled said, yeah, you're fine. And here to come to find out that it's like, oh no, I can run for president. I can run for US Senate. I can run for Congress, but I supposedly can't hold office as a state or local position, which is it just seems so backwards to me.
Well, when you started running, you weren't even a felon yet. You weren't even convicted yet.
Yeah, I wasn't convicted. So that's the other thing. It's like I was prosecuted not by the local DA. I was prosecuted by the AG's office. So their number one thing is like felony conviction rates. So he was like, I'm not going to accept any plea unless it has a felony. Like, you can swap them out for whatever charges you want, but as long as one of them's a felony, like, you know, it has to be, or I'm not accepting it. And I mean, I have 2 children. My options were like roll the dice on a trial and look at maybe 10 years in jail, or, you know, take a plea that had a felony attached to it. So it had already been so long. I really did not want to drag the victims' families through anything else, you know, like, because that's hard on them. And it's you just want it done and over with, you know, like it's like I wanted to just move on to the next thing in my life. Like,
That's an absolutely crazy story, because not knowing you, not knowing your story, just hearing it for the first time, just the small pieces I'm putting together are you're in grief. It's the night of your husband's funeral and you have an accident where somebody else dies. I feel like this is almost a humanizing crime. It's not, and I hate to put a crime that way because there was a victim. Like you said, there were people who were injured and killed in the accident. But it doesn't necessarily, and I can see why voters might not hold this against you, given the circumstances, given the time that's passed, and given the fact that you pled guilty and were accepting of your recompense and taking the plea deal. I usually tell people never take a plea deal, fight things to the tooth and nail, fight the state. But if you've already served your sentence and time served as part of your plea deal, walk away from it at that point.
Right. It just does suck, like, you know, because the whole thing with being a felon, it's like your rights are just like revoked. There's no path to redemption. There's no process to get them back. It's just, it doesn't matter, you know, how young you were, or if you made a mistake just one time in your life. It's like, I can never own a firearm. I can't, well, I guess I can vote in PA, but in some states, like, you can't even vote as a felon. And then now they're saying, even though the people of your town who know you, you know, my town is like 562 people, you know, like, they actually know me. Like, I volunteer at the food bank. I help with Boy Scouts. Like, it's such a small town. Like, everyone knows everyone. So for them to, like, you know, go out and vote. And I had obvious Democrats voting for me, Republicans voting for me. I went door to door. I just talked to everyone. And I just talked about, like, voluntary ways that we could go about achieving the goals of things that people want done in this town. And I have like a Facebook page for my mayor stuff, and the amount of comments I get, all it is like, okay, well, we don't need a code enforcement officer. Can't we just go around and see who needs help mowing their lawn, or, you know, picking up their garbage, or whatever it is that people are complaining about on people's private property? Because, like, I don't care what people do. So it's kind of hard as a libertarian to, like, deal with code enforcement type stuff. But, you know, that's what people live here for. They like the small town because they're just left alone. We don't have cops here. Like, it's so nice.
You don't have cops, you say?
No. We have, like, the state police that once in a while will patrol, or they'll come over if they're called. We used to have one town cop, but we got rid of that. And now they're trying to hire another town cop. And everyone is just, like, in an uproar about it. So I was planning on vetoing that at the next meeting, because it would have been a new ordinance. And as the mayor, I could have, like, vetoed that ordinance. But yeah, I was removed the day before. So they didn't end up voting on it, though, because now I don't even know if they have enough people, because I wasn't the only elected libertarian. My boyfriend was also elected to borough council. So I was the mayor. He was on borough. He was a councilman. And, you know, he has the same kind of a felony on his record as well. So and his was, like, just a drunken fight with a guy, you know, and he was on his property, so it was trespassing or whatever.
I think so many people judge felons and judge a felony, and that they're quick to agree with the government's position that a felon should be deprived of their rights and certain rights just because of what they believe a felony is. But I think what is and is not a felony is one of the biggest misconstruences of legal literature in this country. Like, there's a book out there called, I think it's a crime a day. You commit, they are talking about how you commit 7 felonies a day without even thinking about them. That just in the average course of an American's day, you'll commit 7 felonies. And then crime a day, where they tweet out just a list of felonies. Every day they tweet out on that Twitter account something that's an obscure felony that you can do that you would never realize. Like, importing garbage from Hawaii to California is a federal felony, and stuff like that. Printing a child's clothing where the tag is not in Helvetica or Arial font is a felony. Like, there's so many ridiculous things that constitute a felony, and the vast majority of them are non-violent victimless crimes. And even the ones that are violent crimes that have a victim, is not the point of our criminal justice system a reform system to reform people and reintroduce them and reintegrate them back into society? And if someone has served their sentence and been reformed to the point where you can release them back to society, shouldn't that be with all their rights restored?
Exactly. And like, the majority of people that I've spoken to, like in my little town, they all like see, like, that's like a normie opinion now. Like, they all think that, like, it's not, they're like, well, I just don't get it. You served your time. Like, what else is there? Like, what's the point of serving your time if, like, when you get out, you're still just going to be treated this way for life?
People wonder why recidivism rates are so high for actual criminal felons in this country. It's because of all the penalties imposed on a felon after their sentence is served. You get out of jail, but you still can't pass a background check to get a job, or pass a referral or credit check to get an apartment. So you're on the streets with no source of income, no way to feed yourself. And the only thing you have left to resort to is the crime that got you arrested in the first place.
Right? Or like, I know in Pennsylvania, they love taking your driver's license for just any little thing. Like, if if you're involved with family court and you don't pay child support, oh, well, they'll take your driver's license. So then you definitely can't get to work, to pay your child support. Or same with like felons, or, anything like that's usually one of the stipulations that comes along with so many things. Oh, you didn't pay your fines? Well, we're going to take your driver's license. Even now, PennDOT has gotten so out of control that if you switch insurance companies and you don't call PennDOT and tell them that you have a new insurance company, they'll revoke your license, because all they get is the cancellation from the previous policy or whatever. Like, I've had people, like friends of mine, that have lost their license for just the most ridiculous reasons. And it's like, this clearly is not like what it was. This can't be how we were meant to live our lives. Like, where you have to just worry about every little thing, or the government's just going to squash you from every angle.
I just think of the discrepancies, like from state to state as well, and how wild it is. Because I look at here in New Hampshire, where we have full rights restored to felons. Like, a felon could buy a gun here in New Hampshire. There's nothing in the state level prohibiting them from doing that once they've been released and are no longer serving their sentence. We have multiple felons sitting in our state legislature who've done their sentences, reformed, and gone on, and addressing a big part of their previous life is a big part of what they run on a lot of the times, and it humanizes them. And it is a very powerful thing when someone is truly reformed to run on addressing the circumstances that created their criminal background. And we get a lot of libertarians that way. But then, then there's states like Rhode Island, where I think there was a point in the 1990s where a full 41% of their state legislature had been convicted of a felony at one point. And over half of them had investigated ties to the mafia. And like, it's just status quo and commonplace. But even here in New Hampshire, where rights are fully restored, when I'm out petitioning for libertarian candidates and helping them get on the ballot, every single day I'll have somebody tell me they wish they could sign, but they're not a registered voter because they can't vote because they're a felon. And I have to remind them and inform them that yes, you can. In New Hampshire, you get your rights back. And because the courts don't tell people that. The courts tell people they lose their rights as a felon and don't tell them what they get back, when they get it back, or how to get it back.
Yeah, and that's how it is in Pennsylvania too. Because I've had people say the same thing. Oh, well, I couldn't because I'm a felon. It's like, well, in PA, as long as you're not incarcerated, like, you can vote. I mean, that's one of the few rights we do get back. But yeah, we definitely can't have firearms here, though.
The only hang up with a felon trying to get a firearm in New Hampshire is the federal paperwork, because they still fail on that with the federal paperwork to purchase one from a dealer. But then we don't have any license requirements. We have constitutional carry. We have no rules or restrictions on private sale, and no registry. So if you were to sell something to someone who's known to you and you can vouch for their character, it's a legal sale.
I think you can do that here, obviously, just not as a felon. But it is crazy because it's like, every state, it does vary, but it's like hard to draw the line because like I don't know, states' rights, whatever, like, but then with this, I think in other states, or it's not even okay. It's not even that. It's like in other states, I don't think they have the same stipulation, because that's why I could run for federal office, but not state or local, because it's part of the Pennsylvania Constitution. But at the same time, like, we have elected officials within this state serving in office that do have felonies. And like the mayor of York, he has multiple felonies, and his county judge said, yep, you can still hold office. But
so that's an interesting issue and an interesting like parallel, like, because the actual written word in the Pennsylvania Constitution, because I went and looked it up and I read it before, it says you can't have been convicted of an infamous crime. What the hell is and what defines an infamous crime? Because that's a word I've never seen in legal literature. I've never heard in any of the states I've lived in, and I've never experienced having been decided on before. Like, what constitutes an infamous crime? And mind you, this is a document written 250 years ago. So like, what would be the intent in the language back then of an infamous crime?
Well, and that was one of the things that my lawyer had argued, on May 12th or whatever, was, okay, an infamous crime when this law was written was something you'd be hung in the town square for, like, and then if you look it up under like English common law, it's like crimes of dishonesty, or like corruption in office, like where you're defrauding, the embezzlement, like things like that. And they're all specifically listed. But then what they go off of is, case law, where, the Supreme Court has decided in this specific case that infamous crimes means all felonies. Okay, but if it means all felonies, then how come this felon is allowed to be mayor in his town, but I can't? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
I mean, I feel like I would almost have to default, like, in my own legal understanding, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a judge, I didn't go to law school, I'm just an autistic guy on the internet who likes to talk like, come up with ideas of how things should be understood. Like the supremacy clause of the 14th Amendment, like Section 3 of the 14th Amendment has a restriction on who can hold office, and it lists specific crimes that it lists out as these are the ones that withhold you from office. Like, I would feel it should be a simple argument to say, okay, well, that defines infamous crimes for us, because it's treason, rebellion, providing aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States or the various states, and insurrection.
And yeah, you would think it'd be that simple, but they like to just use it how it fits their narrative, though, not what makes the most sense, or, not something you can actually look up and say, oh, look, it says right here, they're just like, well, we could just decide what it means every time someone challenges it to the Supreme Court, and it could possibly change, or, just whoever is on the Supreme Court at the time. It's crazy.
Now, the process by which you were actually informed was a little bit weird too, from what I read, because I tried to read as much of the story as I could. It just didn't make sense. Like, I couldn't believe it happened when I was reading it. I'm like, this is out of a bad like novel, like precluding a civil war or a local uprising, where elected officials are removed from office by unelected bureaucrats somehow. Like, I'm pretty sure I remember reading this dystopian novel by Orwell where something similar happened. But it was before you were sworn in, like after your election. Like, who informed you? Like, when did this happen? Like who made the complaint? Like, was it a bitter vote or somebody who doesn't like you in town? Was it your opponent complained? Like, how did it come to the state's attention that they had the need to investigate whether or not you were eligible to hold office?
So I think I have another theory that involves like somebody from the PALP, but who initially tipped off the DA. So then the DA made a phone call to, the borough council president here, and he is one of my he's definitely not a fan of mine, because my whole thing on running, like, he's been there for 13 years. And in his time, we've had a secretary who was found guilty of embezzling, who is the secretary now in just the next county over, or not even the next county, the next township over. So like, there were some shady things that went on, and it was all under this guy's watch. Like, he's the borough council president. Nothing gets done. Like, there's special money allocated to things, then none of those things get done, but the money disappears. And just people are just tired of them going in there and doing nothing. Like this guy, he said to me at one of the meetings, I don't know who this Robert guy is that you keep bringing up, but I don't know what you're talking about. When I like tried to correct him on like parliamentary procedure and I brought up like Robert's Rules of Order, and he was like, I have no idea who Robert is. And I'm like, what? Okay. So it's really hard to get things done because like if you have a disorganized meeting, like he was trying to tell me I couldn't bring things up under new business unless it was on the agenda. And I'm like, well, no, it's new business. Like me putting it on the agenda is like I don't have to do that. Like I could bring it up still, like it's like a courtesy to put it on the agenda. It's not like definite, and just simple things like that. So people were just tired of him just being inactive and not really doing much. So anytime that he would get called out on Facebook or whatever, like, oh, then it's the end of the world. So he didn't like me over just like simple things like me complaining about him not doing his job. And he looked for the first way to get rid of me. So the DA called me December 30th and asked me to resign. And I said, absolutely not. Like, I am not doing that. And he was like, well, it's come to my attention that you might not be eligible. And he like asked me, about my charge. And I said, yeah, those are my charges. Like, I'm not lying about those or, disputing them at all. And he's like, okay, well, just get back to me or whatever, think about it for a couple of days. And, then he called me a couple more times and I told him like, no, I'm not resigning. And so then I went to go swear in, or I went to the first meeting, January 3rd. And the borough council president, asked me like, well, is there anything that would prevent you from holding office? And I was like, well, that's weird. Because I like just got this phone call, a couple days ago and nobody had heard anything. And I hadn't talked to anyone about it. And I was like, well, I'm still like waiting to hear back from my lawyers and stuff. I don't really want to like talk about it in an open meeting. So they swore in my boyfriend and then I didn't get sworn at that meeting. So I was like, okay, I got to figure out if I'm like allowed to do this. Cause I didn't know what to do, So I talked to a friend who is a lawyer and he said, you're fine. You can sign the oath and you can swear in. It's not anything that you're not allowed to do. And I was like, okay. So I took the oath. I tried to go down to the borough council office and take the oath there. And the secretary said, no, I'm not allowed to take your oath. And I was like, what? She's like, no, yeah. And you have to wait till the next meeting. You can only take your oath in the meeting. And I was like, okay. Well, then they changed the date of the next meeting. They wanted to push it another week. So it would have been past the 30 days where I hadn't been sworn in. So if I wouldn't have sworn in within those first 30 days, it would be like an automatic forfeit and they would just get to appoint someone. So I hurried up and went over to a notary because I Googled like, where can I get sworn in? And it said like a notary, a judge, or, whatever. So I went to the notary's office and got sworn in there, got my paperwork, took copies over to the elections office, got some more copies, tried to take one over to the borough council building, and they refused to even take my paperwork. And I'm like, you can't refuse. Like, you have to keep it on file for 6 years. That's the Pennsylvania state law. And so I just left it in the drop box or whatever. And then shortly thereafter was whenever I was served by the Potter County Sheriff's Department with my quo warranto to have me removed from office. And whenever they did that, Andy also received one as well.
It just seems wild to me that there is this stopgap where if you don't, like, basically a constructive resignation, you get elected but never show up. And there's cases where I think that makes sense, like somebody wins by write-in with no intention of ever taking the office, or like Mickey Mouse gets elected or some kind of crazy thing and kind of protest. Somebody elects a cat. Sure, have a period of time where if nobody is sworn in, the office is considered vacant and vacancy procedures take place. But to have the secretary have the ability to just refuse to administer your oath until for that window, that is allowing one elected official or bureaucratic official to nullify and vacate another election through obstructive means with no recourse, and there's nothing illegal about it either.
Right. And like all you can do in that process is like, file something to the judge that just basically is the judge saying, hey, you have to do your job. Like there's no repercussions or anything. It's just basically like a paper. You would get a paper from the judge that said, hey, do this.
And that could take 45 days to even get a hearing with the judge in some cases. In your 30-day window to get sworn in.
Yeah, exactly. And then like the hardest part about this was, so whenever I was served, since it's a civil matter, and like the DA or the attorney general are the only people, I guess, that have like the authority to do this. So I had 20 days after I was served to try and find a lawyer to even fight this. And trying to find someone in rural Pennsylvania that does election law is like impossible. I think I called every lawyer on Google, and I ended up finding one out of Philadelphia. So I am paying a lawyer to drive, over 6 hours to the complete other side of the state to come out here and defend me for this case.
That's absurd. I often forget how big Pennsylvania actually is because I'm a little New Englander, and my New Hampshire I can get from Maine to Vermont in 3 hours, and cross my entire state. In 2 hours, I can drive south for 2 hours, and I've gone through Massachusetts and I'm in Rhode Island. So 6 hours to still be in the same state is absurd to me.
Yeah. And I live in like very, very rural Pennsylvania, so it's like an hour to the closest grocery store.
Now, one of the craziest things to me about this whole story is like we have so few elected officials in the Libertarian Party and the Liberty Movement that usually whenever somebody's elected, it's big news. Everybody knows like somebody got elected to some kind of office. Now, I get it. Pennsylvania, it's a little bit different because you guys have like municipal dog catchers that are elected on a partisan ballot in some towns and boroughs. And it's like you have more elected offices than my entire state. And we have the largest legislature in the world. But you got elected to an executive position, a mayor. That is like when Kane, when WWE wrestler, even running as a Republican, as a Liberty Republican, got elected mayor of Knoxville. It was one of the biggest deals in the Liberty movement as far as news goes, because like it's an executive position where the people of that city or town had decided they wanted libertarian values and libertarian solutions represented and put into power and put into place. I didn't even hear about your election or about any of your drama or about any of the issues surrounding your election until the day your court case was settled, removing you from your elected position. And I follow you on Twitter. And none of that was like the algorithm suppressed it, but it wasn't talked about in the Liberty community. It wasn't talked about in the Libertarian movement. And this whole time you had a legal defense fund up to try and cover the cost of this lawyer, to protect your election's integrity, to keep your elected office, and to protect the will of your voters and your electorate in voting you into office. What did the Libertarian Party do to help you?
Honestly, not much. I did have a ton of guys from the LPPA, though, that did come out, from Harrisburg, from Philadelphia, like hours and hours away to be at my hearing for me. So I did have like a nice group of, like a supportive group and stuff. But really, I tried to share things on Twitter as much as I could. Timcast ended up writing an article about it and putting it up on their website. So that was cool, and then recently on Twitter, I had a legal, like a libertarian legal, I don't even know what you would want to call them, like group, organization, whatever, but they sued the government, and they called me, and they were interested in representing me like completely pro bono. So that's pretty cool that they do that. There is an organization in the Liberty movement that does that, like a whole group of lawyers out just like suing the government for free for people. It's really awesome to see.
It's like our own little ACLU that doesn't suck.
Yes, exactly.
So, but it's mind blowing to me because I feel like this is something that should have been, and I get it. The last 8 months, the Libertarian Party has been going through some of its stiffest growing pains in 50 years with the drama over national leadership and coups in various states in Delaware and Maryland and New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and the convention drama in Pennsylvania itself. Like for a one of our elected officials, for a Libertarian Party member who's elected as a partisan Libertarian, not even running in a nonpartisan race, like you're a Libertarian on the ballot representing the Libertarian Party, elected to an executive office, to be removed by a bureaucratic and legal finagling and the National Party to have not stepped up and not done anything. And that blows my mind. And I feel like that's a failure of party leadership at every level. When Donald Trump said snap, the entire Republican Party, every man, woman, child, and registered voter jumped to start demanding votes be counted, ballots be recounted, and audited. When we're having people who poured our heart and souls into these races, and I've run for office a number of times, I've managed campaigns, I'm managing a campaign now, I've petitioned for dozens of Libertarian candidates, I've traveled the country to help Libertarian candidates. It is something, it is a selfless sacrifice that people do, knowing more often than not that we are not going to win, and putting ourselves through it, and to actually win and have it ripped away from you through a technicality that by any means had the party, like the party should have made you aware of the technicality beforehand if they had their act together and they were knowing all the rules and recruiting and vetting candidates. But then once it happened, should have had an apparatus within the party to defend you and defend your election. And I think this is something that maybe now that we actually have a lawyer or a paralegal or somebody with legal experience on our national board, maybe we can look into. But like, do you have any plans to maybe get more involved in your state party moving forward to maybe address some of these concerns moving forward? Because if it happened to you, it can happen to the dog catcher, it can happen to the secretary, it can happen to it happened to your boyfriend.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that our current chair in the LPPA, Rob Coburn, he is amazing. He's also a lawyer, so he, as a friend, you know, like anytime I needed to talk to him about anything, he was always there to answer any questions, or, you know, like, and I would send him my decisions and things like that for him to look over. So like, he definitely, I think if he would have been in leadership at the time, things maybe would have been a little different. But there was just so much division in PA that it was like, it felt like really at the end there, up and like right before convention, that nobody was like focusing on anything but convention. So I think sometimes that's a downfall of the party, is that we get so into the inner party stuff that we're not like focusing on like actually fighting the state, you know, and like
Yes.
avenues or even just little battles that we can try and take on, you know?
Yeah, AJ Olding goes on about this all the time, and he's a good friend of mine. He's from the Libertarian Party of Ohio, and he gave a talk at the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire convention a couple of years ago about how there's an epidemic of people chasing titles in this party, how people in the Libertarian Party care more about being a big fish in a small, irrelevant pond than they do about actually affecting change and positive liberty in our lifetimes, that people care about having that title of chair or vice chair to put on their resume to seek the next internal elected office. And they care more about that than they do about collecting the petitions, about fighting the referendums, about actually changing the law to improve the lives of themselves, their families, their neighbors, and their potential constituents if they were to get elected. And we don't build our bench because we don't have people actually doing the work that needs to be done, where we should have, by all means, 100 mayors,
Right.
to pull from to run for Congress the next time around, because you have executive experience, you have the name recognition and the goodwill of the people in your jurisdiction. Like, that's how we build our benches, by getting people to do the actual work. But instead, people are too busy fighting over Robert's Rules of Order and who's going to be the chair of the party, or if it's the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania or the Keystone Party of Pennsylvania, or whether or not a meme constitutes a threat of murder. Like, these things don't matter. Nothing in the Libertarian Party matters,
Right.
if we don't use the party as a tool to engage with the state in meaningful manners in electoral processes.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, it seems like we're just so used to being in our bubble and like talking to just whatever's going on within the party. But I don't know. I hope things will change, like, and we will actually start like taking action. Like, I love going out to protest. Like, before I joined the Libertarian Party, I feel like I was going to more protests than since I've been in. And that's like, I feel like it shouldn't be that way. I feel like it should be the other way around. Like, I was standing on the Capitol steps in Harrisburg with like wearing my 3-month-old baby to the reopen protest at the beginning of COVID, like, and Tom Wolfe decided to lock us down for even longer while we were all standing on the steps. And like, but those are the kind of things that like revved me up, to even get more involved in politics. So I was like, they're locking us in their houses. They're trying to force inoculate us. Like they're just, and you're looking at all these other countries and Canada and Australia and just watching the madness. And you're like, how long until it's on our doorstep and we're just doing nothing? And people think that they go on Twitter and bitch a little bit or go on Facebook, and shit talk the government. They're like, look, I did my part. And it's like, well, no, like that's not all that there is.
No, there's 11 million people locked in an internment camp in Shanghai, China. There's an entire continent of people being deprived of their rights in Australia. The Canadian government is using a tragedy in Texas to strip all Canadians of their right to keep and bear arms. The Prime Minister of Canada was just diagnosed with COVID for the third time after his fourth booster shot. And the VAERS incident report system is showing more positive negative reactions to the vaccine than successful vaccine preventions of the virus. Like, at what point do we realize that it is all a showing game? It is all a theater to control people. It is all a push for more authoritarian control, and realize that our internal bickering about who runs the party's social media isn't winning elections, isn't getting us into office where we can challenge the status quo, isn't helping us move the needle towards liberty in any meaningful manner. Like, bitching about abortion on Twitter isn't going to take the government boot off your neck at the grocery store. Right.
Exactly. And like, I watched a lot of people just fall in line and, oh, well, I, just get along, like just put their mask on and just whatever. It's just a mask, or just go with it. And just like, but then they'll be like, well, if they ever do this, I'm gonna, do this, or out of my cold dead hands. And, and it's like, but are you really like what like, I don't know. I think people like to talk a lot. And then whenever it's time to like, do the action, they really fall behind, and they just don't really end up doing much of anything.
Now, here's a question we glossed over. Like, by what percentage, like by what margin, and in how big of a district, how many voters did you actually win by? Because it was a heads-up race. It was just two candidates, right? And you,
well, they were
straight,
and then a write-in, and the write was already on borough council, and he like stood outside all day long, outside of the one polling place in town, but like that's how a lot of our candidates actually like are seated, is like people like me and Andy were like, oh, well, we're on the ballot. Like, nobody else even took the initiative to do that. Like, the people in off like that are on our borough council, I think they all have won by write-in, like, so whenever I actually won the contested race against the incumbent mayor, who's been there for years and years and years, and he has like a big family here, and he also rents from the borough council president. So the borough council president had incentive to want to keep him there, because he always said, well, I got to vote with the borough council president or I won't have a place to live. And it's just like little town, like small town corruption like that, and but I ended up winning by like just a slight margin, because it was like a 3-way split. So I thought, like, at the end of election night, I thought that I had lost, but then they had like other votes to count, I guess, like, because they did mail-in ballots here in PA. So there were some mail-in ballots, and I had Democrats voting for me there. So I ended up getting like 38 votes was all it took to win, but there was only like 99 people who voted.
Well, and how big is the town and only 99 voters?
562 people, or 531 or something like that. Like,
so that's an abysmal voter turnout, and that just shows like the power of like apathetic electorates can be swayed very easily just by doing the bare minimum of showing up and like just talking to a handful of people. And I think that might be one of the biggest takeaways from your story, is like how many libertarians are missing opportunities because they're not doing the bare minimum.
And that's the thing, because people are like, oh, well, it's just a small town, or, oh, you only got 38 votes, or this or that. And it's like, yeah, but like in this town, that's the best place to do something like this. these people love freedom. They live here because they aren't messed with. They don't have to worry about cops. Like, nobody enforces borough ordinances. You just, like, you know what I mean? It is freedom here. I mean, I think the barter and trade system is like, this is probably one of the few places that still exists. I know that I see people doing that on a daily basis here. Like, it's like stepping back in time is like what I always tell people about this town. It's so small, but it's nice. I like it. My kids are safe here. They can just go out and play. And if they're doing something wrong, like, one of my neighbors is going to call me and let me know, like, before they even get home.
So I am curious as to what happens now. What happens to your seat now at this point? Because I can think of one similar story to yours from New Hampshire. It oddly enough, it involves a felony conviction and jail time or removal from office under similar circumstances. But how things played out was shocking to me. I don't know if you remember, but when Virginia had elected their transgender state representative, the Democratic Party lost their minds. They're like, the first ever elected transgender state rep is Democrat in Virginia. And I got banned by the Democrats on Facebook from their Facebook page for commenting. I'm like, actually, Massachusetts elected a transgender Republican in the 90s, and New Hampshire has elected one 3 times because she's been removed from office twice. But her first time was after she'd gone to jail for terrorism or terroristic threats, because she called in a bomb threat to a hospital for some reason. I don't know why. But after she'd finished her jail sentence, she ran for state representative in New Hampshire. As a convicted felon, you're allowed to do that. She got elected in an overwhelming majority because it was a heavily Democratic city that she was running to represent. And then somebody challenged her and said, no, she can't be elected. She's a felon under sentence, because she was on early release. She hadn't actually finished her sentence. They released her early for good behavior, and she still had 2 years left on her sentence. And so it became a big question of, like, is she eligible to run for office and vote once she's been released or once her sentence has been discharged? That was a question that had to be settled. And they were arguing back and forth with the courts and the Secretary of State. And finally, she just said, fuck it. She resigned and walked away. And they said, okay, we're going to hold a special election to replace her. And then she won the special election by write-in. And then after she won the special election by write-in, the courts ruled that it was until her sentence was discharged, so she couldn't hold office for that term. But by the time that term had expired, she was then eligible to run for the next year, and she won again with 80% of the vote. So I thought it was funny. And she's a psychotic individual. Had nothing to do with her being transgender. I was on the opposite side of a debate in the Nashua City Hall with her over raising the smoking age, and she started screaming at me about how I was trying to kill grandmas and children by not raising the smoking age to 25. Just an utter batshit woman. She'd run for, she's also run for sheriff. Yes, as Mike in chat points out, Stacey Lawton is her name. She's very active in Nashua and New Hampshire politics, and I think she's a bit loony. But, like, that was a really weird circumstance where they removed her twice and she got reelected 3 times every time they removed her. What happens to your seat now?
Well, that's what they brought up at the end of the last meeting. And Jesse, who is the current interim mayor, was borough council president prior to that. He said, oh, well, no need to rush. We'll get a hold of our lawyer and we'll figure out blah, 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 blah. Well, then I sent out an email that night after I went home, checked over everything to make sure that I was correct in the procedure. And I was like, well, actually, you guys should have voted on something. You should probably call an emergency meeting or a special meeting to make sure that you pass this and you put an ad out in the paper, because you have 30 days or else it gets filled by a judge. So, you know what so he's like, oh, no rush. Cause I'm sure that the easiest way for the judge is just, okay, the borough council president's the mayor now, and the guy who's borough council president, he got the least amount of votes, like, out of anybody who was reelected to council. And he actually ended up getting, like, more votes than me, way more votes than anybody else. He got like 70 something. So everybody wanted Andy on there. But, like, I guess that's what they'll do then, is accept letters from the public, and then borough council will decide who fills Andy's seat and then my seat. So if anything, I've motivated a ton of people to put their name in and get involved and start paying attention to what the borough council is doing. Because what I keep saying, it's like it blew me away, like how easy it would be to get away with any sort of corruption in a small town like this, simply because like nobody is paying attention. And when people aren't paying attention, it's like then they don't even have to hide from anyone, you know?
So is there anything stopping you from running again and making them do this all over again?
Nope, because they brought that up too at court. I guess there's another guy who I can't think of his name right now, but he like keeps running and running and running over and over again, even though like he's not allowed to run for office or not allowed to whatever. And I know I have a friend who he was removed the same way, but then his wife ended up getting put in for him. So he kind of is just like there by proxy now. But we couldn't do that because I'm like, crap, me and Andy are both, we both got removed. So I can't even like, I can't even try and put him in.
Now, are you going to plan to run again? Test the system, see if there's any stresses in the system at some point. Does the DA give up, or now that Waldenberger and the old guard and the LP are gone, nobody's going to complain about it next time?
Well, the DA did say that he's going to retire. So if then maybe I'll just like slip back in there, you know, like, and nobody will notice. And this was like the first and only time this DA's ever filed anything like this. He didn't have any clue how to even file a quo warranto against me. So he ended up making a whole bunch of mistakes like within the filing, simply because he just like didn't know what he did. And I even like, they put me on the front page of like all these newspapers. Like it literally said Austin duo in the DA's crosshairs. And I'm like, for what? For getting elected by the people of our town? Like that's what the DA's has his crosshairs on? Like nothing better to do?
It pains me because when you do think about it, and I know the United States is not a democracy. The United States is barely even a functioning republic. But at the local levels, we are essentially a democratic system where we do elect our local executives, our local representatives to manage our towns, our counties, our states. It's only at the federal level where we're not a democracy in any shape or form. But like one of the hallmarks of democracy, and to bring back to parliamentary procedure that you brought up earlier in Robert's Rules of Order, something I think many libertarians are more intimately familiar with than they are with their own neighbors, which is unfortunate, is there's procedures in Robert's Rules of Order for overturning and overruling and allowing the will of the body to supersede any rule or regulation if it's deemed that's the will of the body. And I feel like that is the essential purpose of an election, is for the body, the people, the electorate, the voters of a jurisdiction or a district to decide who they want in a position. The rules be damned. And if the people of your district decide they wanted you there, but the state and bureaucrats 6 hours away in Philadelphia decide they didn't want you there, damn be to their rules, because the people spoke. And I think that's what matters, and I think that's what's worth taking away from it, along with the fact that you did the bare minimum to get there. You did the bare minimum to get involved and speak up when you felt the need to speak up, and it cascaded into this nightmarish legal kerfluffle that nobody could have predicted. That this should be a lesson that libertarians take away of: do the minimum, do more than the minimum, but actually like understand what you're doing too, because you didn't know about these rules. Nobody was there to tell you about the rules. I'm actually writing a chapter for a book the Libertarian Party is going to be publishing soon, priming people to run for office, and I'm writing on how to start a federal campaign, because that's my expertise. I manage congressional and Senate campaigns, and I run for Senate, I've run for Congress. And like one of the first things I talk about, I'm like, before you decide, you need to convince other people it's a good idea for you to run. And then you need to find all the people who don't want you to run and sit down with them and let them talk you out of it. Because if the people in your life want to talk you out of it, you're probably not a good fit for it. But the most important thing you can do if you still decide to run is know the goddamn rules. And this isn't on you for not knowing the goddamn rules. My first run for Congress, I had no clue what the hell I was doing. It wasn't until after my second run for federal office, even during my second run for federal office, I barely had a clue what I was doing. I had to learn the rules as I went. But now that I'm like involved in helping consult on campaigns and manage on campaigns, my failures and the things I learned in the past have set me up to help other people succeed so much better. And I think your experience here, because you had one of the most obvious failures, and that's just looking at the rules ahead of time and knowing that this could have happened, but you still won and you still did everything right by doing the bare minimum. And so there's so many things to take away from your run and from your experience. And I do hope you run again. I think it'll be hilarious. Maybe run for DA. Do you even have to be a member of the bar to run for DA in Pennsylvania?
I think that is like one of the only positions that you have to be a lawyer or at least go to law school to run for. But that I know, because I'm like, if I could just find any libertarian lawyer, because like the DA here runs unopposed with an R and a D next to his name, because he wins the primaries like from the Republicans and the Democrats. So he runs as both every single year.
It's definitely a way to do it. Fusion is definitely something. That's another tactic libertarians don't use often enough that I think we should in the future, especially in states like Pennsylvania where you just have 150 fucking elections every month. But I want you to run again. I think it's going to be hilarious if you run again. But I mean, we're up at the end of the hour. This has been really fun, really interesting, really engaging conversation. I am so thankful you agreed to come on tonight. Kate, where can everybody follow you, learn more about what you're doing, and maybe follow your next run for?
Well, I'm Mayor Kate on Twitter. And oh yeah, there's my Twitter. And then I have the Kate Crosby Mayor of Boston, PA Facebook page if you want to like watch any live streams or drama that goes on at our borough council meetings, because they're always interesting. But that's pretty much it. I will be at PorkFest. And I will be speaking at PorkFest. So that's pretty much it, though. But thanks for having me on. This was fun.
Well, thank you for coming, and thank you everyone for tuning in and watching and giving this a listen and a share. Give a comment below, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Let me know what you thought of the show. Let us know what you want to hear in the future. We have so many varying topics to discuss and so much going on in the Liberty movement and the Libertarian Party to bring forth and shed light on and learn from. And everything's worth learning from. But tell me what you guys want to hear. And until next time, be free. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Subversive. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to get alerted every time we go live on YouTube. And make sure to leave some comments and reviews on whatever platform you listen on to let me know what you thought of this episode. And a huge thanks and shout out to our sponsors and the awesome members of the Insurgency on Patreon. If you enjoyed this content, you can join the Insurgency on Patreon by following the links in the description for patreon.com/O'Donnell. And if you can't catch the show live, you can always catch it the next day on YouTube, Odyssey, Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, CastBox, and wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts every day. So until next time, everybody, be free.